Well, welcome back, everybody, and it's good to have Reverend Phyllis here from Adelaide. Would you welcome Reverend Phyllis? She's got a great talk for us today. Thank you, Phyllis.
Thank you, Reverend Bill. Happy to be with you all again. It's a bit of a challenge for me now. I've got to go from you and 1 week and Brisbane the next if I'm going to keep that connection with both groups, because they're now in the same time zone as yourselves. So yes, I won't be seeing you every week, but it's lovely to be here today. And what a special day it is. But I want to acknowledge the fact that my talk today, I have borrowed some of the ideas that I read in a talk that was given by Eric Butterworth back in 1979. I found this talk very inspiring and it really resonated with me. And as Reverend Bill had asked me to do the talk on Easter Sunday, I thought how appropriate it was to use some of the ideas that Eric used. I have used some of the quotes from that talk, and if I say a quote, know that it's from that talk unless I've mentioned otherwise. But today is Easter Sunday, as you all know, a day of giving often Easter eggs to one another as an indication of new life. But many people are focusing on the resurrection of Jesus, and yes, that is an important aspect of today. But more importantly, as Eric explained back in 1979, Easter is not so much about what happened over 2,000 years ago, but more importantly, what is happening today in you and me. How does the resurrection story resonate with you? Do you see it as, pardon me, a miracle that happened 2,000 years ago? Or do you see it as something that happened that you too can find a personal connection with in your life today? Most of us are aware of the story as told in the scriptures. When Jesus travelled to Jerusalem for the Passover, and we heard about that on Palm Sunday, many rejoiced and welcomed him. Did he know as he entered Jerusalem on that day what he would encounter in the coming days? And did he do it anyway? I believe he did. I don't know what you believe, but that's what I believe he knew what was ahead of him, but he did it anyway. We know from the story that to the Roman rule and established church, he was seen as a threat. He was a threat. He was arrested on false charges. And then, as we know, on Good Friday, he was crucified. At the time, those who had feared him thought this was the end of the story and his presence. But in reality, it was the beginning, or a new beginning. For it was on Easter Sunday when it was discovered that the stone had been rolled away from the tomb where his body had been laid, and he was no longer there. We read in the scriptures that the disciples and others saw him later, and it seemed to confirm that he had risen from the dead. Was this a phenomenon that happened overnight? Was it God performing a miracle, or was it something else? Jesus demonstrated, I think, throughout his life that he had an understanding of something much greater within him. Instead of looking out the window of his sense and human self, he looked out the window of the magnificence of his divine self and became aware of all the possibilities available, not just only to him, but to each and every one of us. It seems that his mission was to demonstrate to those who, like us, too often rely on the view from our human eyes judging by the limited view that our sense consciousness offers. But he was aware of and I'll quote here, dimensions of experience beyond those which are observable to the human sense, end of quote. And he moves through that. How? I certainly don't know. I'm not at the same level of consciousness as he was, obviously. Whether I will get to that level in this lifetime, I doubt it. However, I can certainly accept that this man called Jesus, through practice, became a very spiritually evolved man who walked this earth, bled just as we do, was tempted during his experience in the wilderness and at other times, no doubt, just as we are. He expressed anger, just as we often do, and demonstrated when he and the anger he demonstrated, we learned when he overturned the tables in the temple. Yet he was able to look through a different window to a higher level of consciousness and say no to the temptations his human senses offered him. The Easter story is a grand example of someone looking out the other window to all possibilities, which we too can see from the Christ consciousness when we have eyes to see. The man that many today see as God incarnate and as the exception rather than the example, to me, missed the mark and missed the point of the many demonstrations and lessons that Jesus offered. The teachings of Jesus and the ultimate demonstration was to show us that we can overcome adversity. Many of us have experienced a time, or even many times in our lives, I know I have, where we could have said, I don't want to ever go through that again, and then wish to forget it. And yet, here we are today, demonstrating that we too have that power to overcome adversity. During those times of challenge, we may ask, why me? What have I done to deserve this? And the interesting thing for me is that when I look back, I can see that when I got out of the poor me attitude and moved on, the experience was a turning point in my life. That journey through that adversity helped me to see that there was another way. I looked out another window and saw the possibilities available to me instead of being locked in the negative situation. You could say I went through a resurrection. Eric reminds us, and I quote, to be resurrected means to get out of the place where you are and to get into a higher plane, a higher consciousness, end of quote. Recently, I participated in the classes facilitated by Rachel Watton, soon to be Reverend Rachel Watton, that was based on the book by Robert Brummer called Finding Yourself in Transition. During that series of classes, we looked at the times when we experienced a major change in our lives, such as the death of a loved one, the loss of a job, an illness, rejection from a close friend, and there are many other examples that I could quote. But these experiences can throw us into a feeling of great turmoil because life has changed, and what we once knew as life, as our life experience, is very different. Robert based his book on the story of the Israelites and their journey from bondage to the Pharaoh to what Moses said was the promised land that he had heard about through his connection with the Christ spirit within him. Although he called that God. He said that this promised land was a land of milk and honey. The Israelites had known bondage for many years, and their long journey tested many of them, and they questioned the validity of Moses and his direction and his quest for them to experience freedom. They asked questions such as, what are we doing out here in this wilderness? And also often said, wasn't it not easier serving the Egyptians than putting up with this situation? There was a lot of murmuring and disquiet among the people because it seemed to take too long to get to the promised land. And of course, we know the story says it took 40 years. And as metaphysicians, we know that 40 means just as long as it takes. Not all of the people that left Egypt with Moses, and including Moses, experienced the newfound freedom of the promised land. And it seems a new generation were the ones who made the final journey into the land of milk and honey. So what does this story have to do with the resurrection? Well, to me, it's an example of how the symbology of the scriptures can show us how we too need a new generation of thoughts to move us out of a seemingly horrendous situation that seems to have no way out to a bright new experience that at one stage seemed impossible to achieve. It's about looking through the right window, the window of all possibilities. One of the very teachings that truly attracted me to unity was this metaphysical way we examine the scriptures and discovered that they are outpicturing our own lives and our own spiritual unfoldment, or as Grace would say, our unfurlment. The story of the crucifixion and resurrection is no different. Eric wrote, and I quote, "I'm convinced that it is very relevant, but I believe that somehow we must cut through a lot of the, if I can use the favourite word of mine," he says, "the gobbledygook, and somehow let this transcendent process come alive in us. Then we are going to experience something that is very beautiful, very wonderful, and very lasting." End of quote. Don't you love that word, gobbledygook? I did. Brought a smile to my face when I read that. That's why I quoted it. It's about recognizing that, as with all the so-called miracles that Jesus performed, and the resurrection is another demonstration that tells us that we too have the power to transcend adversity. To me, the teaching, I beg your pardon, read that one. We can stay stuck in the old way of thinking that we were introduced to often as children, or we can ask questions. We can look to science even and see that spirituality and science are aligning more and more, as research has proven. Much of what the mystics of yesteryear spoke, wrote, and believed. Eric uses his high school physics book in his talk and says that he realizes that most of what he read in his high school physics book, to all intents and purposes, was a lie. Why? Because our whole insight has changed. It was fact for the time, and through research, the ideas and understanding of today are very different to the understanding of yesterday. Ever asked what your purpose is in life? I have. And my latest answer is that I am here to allow my divinity to express more and more each day through my daily activities. I believe that is what Jesus' mission was, to demonstrate the divinity of humankind, and that it is everyone's inherent purpose to grow in consciousness, to allow the genius within to express in all we do. Will we be able to get to the level of demonstration that Jesus did? I can't answer for you, and I do not think that I will in this lifetime, as I said before. However, I do whatever I can to embrace a new way of living, moment by moment, because I believe that, like Jesus, I am divine, that the living Christ is within, and it is my purpose to allow that to express at its highest level day by day through my humanity. That is the highest level of my consciousness at that time. Charles Fillmore wrote, "This man in each of us is divine now. Not tomorrow, not next week, in a year when we die, but now." And heaven is now. But his manifestation is still in limbo. Maybe I'll read that quote again. I'm not put my own little take on it. Charles wrote, "This man in each of us is divine now, is in heaven now, but his manifestation is still in limbo. He must be lifted out of this condition into a spiritual one. This is being born anew." When we experience the transformation or resurrection, we are born anew because we've reached a new level of consciousness. So what does this day of celebrating the resurrection of Jesus mean for us? Charles Fillmore wrote that in the Revealing Word, "The resurrection is the raising up of mind and body to their original underlying state. The resurrection is the raising up of mind and body to their original underlying state." Remember, we read in the scriptures that God created humankind in his image and likeness. So we are spiritual beings. Charles also wrote that the word resurrection also suggests that there has been a falling short of the divine standard, therefore the necessity of being restored and revived. Through resurrection, man becomes an inhabitant here and now of a new heaven and a new earth. We need to look through a different window. But reading that from Charles, I was reminded of a story I once heard about an Islamic pilgrim on the road to Mecca. And this pilgrim found it a very difficult journey, one of hardship and dangers. Reminds me of the Israelites going through their 40 days in the wilderness to the promised land. The pilgrim found himself thinking of these hardships and the suffering he was enduring, and he became acutely aware of the distance still ahead of him before reaching Mecca. But suddenly, a blinding light appeared and a voice spoke to him saying, "Mecca is here. Mecca is now." In other words, the road he is traveling is the goal he is seeking. We can look to Mecca or heaven in the future, but we can make it and experience it right now. If we miss this point that we can be in heaven on earth right now, then our quest for truth becomes a frantic reaching for the end of the rainbow, coupled with plaguing anxieties that say we haven't amassed enough truth to suffice us yet. But if we look out that other window, we can see that we are on the road, and that is when we can experience heaven on earth. Remember, the goal and any ending is simply a new beginning. What seemed to be the dead end of spiritual experience was an open tunnel to transcendence. The goal we are seeking is within us and is here now. The resurrection was the ending of one phase of the life of Jesus and the beginning of a new phase. Jesus constantly said, that the kingdom of heaven is at hand, right here, right now. We too can experience heaven right here, right now. And as we understand the symbology of that eventful Easter 2000 years ago, and know that we too can choose to cross out the old, outworn beliefs and resurrect the whole self with a new understanding of who and what we are. Look out the right window to a new understanding and a new consciousness, to a new and bright, joyous life. Charles encourages, as did Eric and Jesus, to lift up our eyes to see all the new possibilities, to lift up your eyes to see the higher understanding of the truth of your being. Years back, I remember hearing the phrase that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. Don't hear that quite so much now, but I like the way Paul Hasselbeck puts it. And I've shared that with you many times, I think, in my talks. He says, we are fully human and fully divine. That resonates with me because to me, that's what Jesus was telling us throughout his ministry and his life. So isn't it time we, like Jesus, lifted our eyes, looked out the right window to a higher way of being and see life as a bright and joyous experience in heaven, on earth, right here, right now? How can we experience heaven on earth right here, right now? It's a simple choice. Not always easy to do, and yet it is simple. The resurrection of Jesus tells us that we too can see, as Eric would put it, the allness in illness, the sufficiency in insufficiency, and the full potentialities even in limitations. Simply by looking out the right window. We can see with eyes of love. Love whatever we do. Love wherever we go. And love whoever we see and interact with. This is the message for me of Easter and the Easter experience. It's about crossing out the old, outworn beliefs through thoughts and feelings and moving into a new level of consciousness. So be sure to look out the right window in all you do. Enjoy the rest of your Easter weekend.
Wow, that was fantastic. Just what we needed to hear. Thank you, Reverend Phyllis. And let's keep that atmosphere because we've got a